WrestleMania What Ifs, matches that never happened that should have happened. We've got a collection of matches that myself and NXSteve have put together. Some were cancelled WrestleMania matches, some that potentially could have made more sense when you look back at it, and some is just pure fantasy booking. It's going to be a great time. We've got plenty of matches to go into. NXSteve, welcome to the stream, and I think we're going to kick things off. We'll talk about Undertaker versus Sting. This is a match I think that many of us would have loved to have seen on a WrestleMania.
Yeah, it's probably, if not the biggest what-if match that we never got, unfortunately, and the fact that they had two opportunities to book this match and still didn't do it is probably the biggest crime in pro wrestling, unfortunately. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive into it then. Obviously, WrestleMania 27 is probably the first likely destination it could have happened. Sting obviously was teasing the idea of potentially leaving TNA. There was vignettes that was put out that made people think that the Undertaker's opponent, or potentially it was Undertaker's return at the time, but a lot of people think that those vignettes were to do with Sting, and obviously think that could be setting up a WrestleMania match. It didn't in the end. Sting re-signed with TNA Wrestling, and the Undertaker ended up taking on Triple H. There was a time where Sting was signed with WWE. Of course, he actually debuted at Survivor Series in 2014, and it led to Sting actually, screwing over the Authority, which led to Sting versus Triple H at WrestleMania 31. Again, another only WrestleMania we ever got with Sting, and it was a potential placement we could have had the Undertaker versus Sting. I think as fun as it was with nostalgic NWO versus DX, for me, I would have loved to have had the dream match of Taker versus Sting. The fact that we never got it, still hurts to this day.
Yeah, I mean, even starting off with 27, you think about the timing, like, obviously it's widely known that Sting was always kind of skeptical about coming to WWE at the time, and like how especially after the Invasion angle, how a lot of the ex-WCW guys were booked, and he's kind of like, even though he knows that the Taker match is the one he wants, obviously he re-signs with TNA, he goes back, and then the vignettes that they run WWE just kind of disappear, and we never see him again. And then, yeah, going on to 31, I mean, it's not like Triple H was like the poster boy for WWE like during the late 90s. So hey, I understand why they did it, but like I said, Taker Sting was kind of just like the beginning. It's the biggest what if match that we never got.
Absolutely. And think as well, had it happened at 27, there would have been a possibility where you could have turned around and said, well, that was during the time where Taker streak would have been on the line. 31, I suppose it really is a what if, because of the fact is, if the match had have happened, Undertaker could have lost in theory, because of the fact that, the streak was over. So the match would have potentially been less predictable. Obviously, the build would have been amazing with how the two mystique of the characters as well, but it is, like you say, the biggest what if in WrestleMania history. Anything else you'd like to add before we go into our next match?
No, I mean, if you think about it, if he'd have signed for 27, they could have even done like a trilogy of matches. Do you know what I mean? Where Taker, like, well, I'm trying to play 31 and 27 together here, but like, if Taker had kept the streak going at 27, then 31 would have happened, and Sting could have got a win back, and they could have drawn out a third match out of it and made a trilogy out of this storyline. But it's just a shame it never happened.
Absolutely. And I think something we talked about off air as well, had it happened at 27, of course, both you guys were a bit younger at that point as well, still could have gone. Perhaps maybe it would have been one of those classics as well that could happen in WrestleMania history, but sadly was not to be. But another match that sadly was not to be, and it was widely expected, was at WrestleMania 8. So the first ever show I watched, by the way, as a wrestling fan. We were expecting, as fans, I suppose, not me included, it was my first show, but many were expecting Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair for the championship, especially after Ric Flair won the Royal Rumble. He had debuted in 1991, holding his Real World Championship, claiming he was the real champion as well. Hogan was the champion at that time until he lost his championship to The Undertaker at Survivor Series 91. Of course, that championship was vacated after Hogan had won it at Tuesday in Texas. They did the Royal Rumble. Ric Flair won it. You assumed we were getting Hogan versus Flair, but instead, apparently Vince McMahon was not very happy with the house show gates with these two when they were wrestling in the house show, so things split up. So we had Ric Flair versus Randy Savage. Very good, really good match if you go back and watch it. We also had Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice. Not very good at all. It was a really bad match. Really screwy finish. Papa Shango got into the match very, very late. And it's one of those big what ifs, because at the time, Hogan and Flair, it was the two top stars of the 80s. This was a match that was seen as a dream match, not done under the WWE banner. As soon as the opportunity for WCW to do it in 1994, they jumped straight in. It was like Hogan's first proper match, if I'm not mistaken, and obviously they made a massive profit of doing it on pay-per-view as well, and it was what led to help to WCW getting Monday Nitro, followed with that as well, to then sort of take it to WWE in the Monday Night Wars.
Yeah, I mean, even if you think about the time period as well, the fact that the NWA was like at the point they are the equivalent to what AEW is now, and they were like the second biggest sort of territory going, and like to have both these monumental, colossal champions be on a show. I mean, yeah, I know obviously WWE's booking back in the day was a bit different because obviously the money wasn't so much involved in the business, and like I think he probably had to be a bit more critical about what he was putting on for these shows. But whereas nowadays we get these hodgepodge matches where we get, for instance, Sami Zayn versus Johnny Knoxville just for a spoof comedy match where you can get away with it nowadays. And I think like you said, if during the house shows that the matches aren't really flowing, maybe he was just hesitant that it wasn't going to be the same when you put it on the biggest stage of them all. And yeah, it is criminal. Like Vince's loss and WCW's gain, but then going forward 10 years did that really pay off for WCW?
Maybe not long term, no. But obviously, like you're going to say there, I mean, obviously, Hogan and Flair, they didn't get to after this because Hogan would leave the company after WrestleMania 8. It could be another reason why this match never happened, because Hogan couldn't necessarily win it. There was the steroid trial going on at the time. Obviously, Hogan, I think, was going to go off and do other things for the time period, perhaps a bit of Hollywood as well. I know he was doing some acting around that time period as well. So, I mean, the thing is that if he'd won the title, he couldn't have carried on defending it. So I guess in the end, they went with a different direction, Flair versus Savage. Obviously, Flair then would go on to win the title back and then would actually lose it to Bret Hart later in 92, who would end up being the future contender and the future top star for WWE, which obviously you could just mention. We'll mention this one third, actually, because obviously we get around to WrestleMania 9 and Bret Hart is the champion. Obviously, he's taking on Yokozuna at the time. Yokozuna goes on to win that match, and obviously Hogan had come back on the build to WrestleMania 9, been missing for nearly a year. He ends up being a part of a tag team, the Mega Maniacs with Brutus Beefcake against Money Inc. They have the tag team title match. You think that's going to be the direction for Hogan, but of course it's a DQ finish. So the fact is the Mega Maniacs lose, and Hogan just can't keep away from that main event scene. After Bret loses, he gets involved and he takes Yokozuna's moment away and wins the title within a few seconds of Yoko winning it. Just completely ruins everything that was going on with Yoko at the time and been built up so strongly. And it just felt like as well that there was an opportunity here to do something with Bret Hart, who was the top babyface star at the time, to make that new star, solidify him as that person, because they were searching through this new generation era, if you will, through 93, 94, 95, and then, you know, Lex Luger was a potential target, could have been a candidate to do so as well, but instead they just sort of gave the belt to Hogan. Hogan wasn't really keen on dropping it to Bret Hart later on in the year, so it went back to Yoko. So for me, I sort of put the question out there, WrestleMania 9, Bret Hart versus Hulk Hogan. WrestleMania 9 not known for being one of the best WrestleManias. In fact, many say it's one of the worst, particularly for that booking decision at the end. For me, Bret versus Hogan, for me, would have just been, it would have felt like that dream match. You know, when you look back in like years go forward, you mentioned about Hogan coming back. Obviously, WrestleMania 18, a prime example, Rock versus Hogan, the two top sort of baby faces from different eras, if you will, the stare down and how everyone got into it. Imagine that at WrestleMania 9, Bret Hart, your current star, going against Hulk Hogan, the person that had been main eventing the previous 8 WrestleManias. Well, mine's one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's with this is the problem with 90s WWF or WWE, is that you know that Hogan is pulling half the strings when it comes to what he's doing on shows, and as good as it would have been for a kind of like passing the torch moment where you would have had this old school passing on to new generation, I just don't think, like I said, it was okay. I think it was probably a smarter idea for Bret to not do the match with Hogan, because it probably wouldn't have gone the way he wanted to go anyway. I mean, I think like no one critiques Bret Hart for his wrestling, whereas we can critique WWE for a bad pay-per-view. So I think Bret ultimately got out of lucky with that one with how the show finished and stuff.
I suppose in one way, rather than a what if, this could have been a missed opportunity, because like you say, it's an opportunity to build that new star. However, would the politics have worked on the night? We've seen in the end Hogan actually walked away still as champion, so if they'd ever done that match, maybe Bret would have been the one that would have been on the losing end.
Yeah, like I said, I reckon that the way if we was to do a prediction show for 93, I would have said that Bret was probably going to lose. Like if I had the wrestling mentality that I know now, and we know kind of how the politics work in wrestling, I think we all would have known that Hogan was going to retain, even though logically it wouldn't make sense. But hey, man, it's Hulk Hogan, and it's late 80s, early 90s, where he's the biggest star in the wrestling. He's a massive, I think he's a film star at this point as well, and it's kind of like he's your your marquee draw and stuff, and it's hard to really try and tell Hogan to take a pinfall when do you know what I mean? He's your biggest star.
Absolutely. Well, he doesn't stick around long after that in '93, and obviously we mentioned he goes to WCW. So obviously Bret and Yoko are left carrying the mantelpiece, it seems, and we mentioned Lex Luger as well going through the summer of '93. You mentioned to me one that we should talk about is actually from WrestleMania 10. Obviously we know that Lex Luger takes on Yokozuna. We know Bret Hart takes on Yokozuna in singles matches. This was the era before triple threat matches, and would the triple threat match have made most sense here? Obviously you look through the crystal ball now, matches that were made later in times where we get 3 superstars, 4 superstars, 5 ways. A triple threat match back then actually would have been amazing for this. And do you reckon it would have worked really well for WrestleMania 10 to have that as your main event, and you would have had the Lex Express to get the main event spot at a WrestleMania?
I mean, for a story narrative, yeah, probably would have made more sense. But for me, I don't know whether it's the case of that Vince was trying to book Luger like the next Hulk Hogan, and like there's all this reports that Luger was told he was going over at Mania, but Bret was so hot at the time it was hard to. And obviously Hogan's not there, so Vince is obviously looking at it like, well, Bret's now my number one guy. It's not Hogan anymore. Luger is essentially a prospect or a project. So again, like I said, for story point, it would have made sense. I just think for a wrestling point, like I said, especially we've had the Rumble finishes with the double win for it just doesn't make sense. The double duty. It's like why should Yoko have to fight Luger to see who faces Bret in the main event? And it doesn't make sense. It's a very weird time, 1994, and yeah, it's just one of them weird ones where it probably would have worked out better if they'd have just done a triple threat.
Yeah, I think so as well. Obviously, you know, when you look at it, I mean, WrestleMania 10 is actually a really fun show. I would recommend people go back and watch it, especially for the opener, because Bret has to wrestle twice as well. He wrestles Owen Hart in the opener, which is one of arguably the best opening matches in wrestling history to a pay-per-view. But at the same time, like you say, as a triple threat match, it works really, really well. And like you say, storyline narrative actually would have made more sense for Bret versus Luger to see who faces Yoko in the main event. That's really the thing that would have made most sense, as the fact that Lex and Bret were both Rumble winners in '94 with the draw. So yeah, it's fun. It's a big what if, because it's the time before triple threat matches. And in hindsight, had that been a thing back then, would WWE have booked a triple threat match? It's quite a fun little ingredient, if you will. But let's bring things forward slightly. NXSteve, you'd like to add quickly?
Just to say, yeah, it's kind of like how New Japan have been like the last kind of like 4 or 5 years, that they were very focused on one-on-one matches, and the idea of triple threats is a really scarce thing to New Japan, and like that's the exact template that WWE was doing back in the 90s, where triple threats were just a non-existent thing, and it's like almost like the idea of 3 people fighting at the same time just seems impossible.
Yeah, it's a shame, but I guess again falls in these what if categories. But for me, I think I would have really liked to have seen that as a triple threat match for WrestleMania 10. When you look back in hindsight, I think it's a really fun idea that you brought forward there. Let's bring it forward a little bit and let's go to WrestleMania 22, a match that we knew was meant to happen, but unfortunately, tragedy did strike. Shawn Michaels versus Eddie Guerrero. Of course, Eddie Guerrero sadly passed away at the end of 2005, but this match was apparently rumored to be happening at WrestleMania 22. 2 guys that overcome demons to have the match. For me, the storyline sounds like it would have been a lot of fun, and just for me, it's a dream match we never got.
Yeah, and do you know what the worst part is that we never know who would have won it. Because if, like we was talking before, that if you look at this sort of 5-6 year period of WrestleManias, where Shawn Michaels is honestly the guy, like he is having killer match after killer match every year, from 20 through to 25 or 26. 26 against the Taker is his last one, and 22 is his dodgy one because he ends up facing Vince. And what we could have got. The like you said, the story with these 2 guys that have overcome personal demons, and like they have this history of being great in-ring workers and great in-ring wrestlers, and like to see what those 2 could have done on the biggest stage of them all. For me, this is almost like the second biggest what if, and it's almost like it's a shame that we didn't get it. Obviously beyond people's control compared to Taker and Sting, but yeah, man, an absolute shame that we never got to see these 2 tear it up on the biggest stage of them all.
Man, I have a funny feeling if he'd faced Eddie Guerrero, he was all about putting and making new stars at the time. I think that Eddie Guerrero was someone that's in around the top of the card on SmackDown at that period. It was in when he passed, he was in a program with Batista, which would have been for the World Heavyweight Championship. I would not have been surprised had Guerrero won that match, but I guess massive what if out of everybody's control, and I guess it's all down to fan speculation, I guess, of how that match would have played out. What we could have got that could have been so much better is Kurt Angle's retirement match. Obviously, a lot of people were clamoring for WrestleMania 35 for John Cena to come in. Obviously, John Cena's first match on the main roster was against Kurt Angle, so everyone thought it'd be a fitting tribute for Kurt Angle's last match to be against John Cena. Not only was it not against John Cena, he was put against Baron Corbin, which I don't think was everyone's popular choice at the time. And the fact that Baron Corbin picked up the victory as well in a match that felt very flat, it's a bit of a sight for sore eyes. To think that Angle versus Cena, I think, would have been a much more fitting end to Angle's wrestling career, and of course being in WWE as well.
This was the one that saddens me, because it's like Baron Corbin has always kind of been the guy that's on the precipice of greatness in WWE, and he gets these good moments where, for instance, he'll win Money in the Bank and he'll have some momentum, and then it just all goes wrong. And this was the same again. He has the retirement match against Kurt Angle, and it just goes, nothing comes of it afterwards, and like, it's like I said, it's a wasted opportunity to do a much bigger spectacle. And like with, say, Cena coming out and being Cena's first match being against Angle would have made more sense. Even if you could, the only other person I would have liked to have seen would have been Chad Gable, because obviously Chad Gable was kind of like the same sort of background as Kurt Angle, and like even that would have been better than Baron Corbin. So it's a very strange booking. But yeah, I mean, Cena was the one that made all the sense in the world, and it just unfortunately never materialized, and now it will go down as Baron Corbin being, and then like it's just something that Baron Corbin still uses today, that I retired Kurt Angle, and it's kind of like, that's nothing to be proud of, man. It's not great booking.
No, it wasn't great booking. It's great for him, great for Corbin, but yeah, it wasn't great for everybody else. It was a bit of a questionable decision at the time, and I think it's an opportunity as well for Kurt Angle, done so much in his WWE career, so just had a bit more of a, dare I say, more high-profile match for WrestleMania, because obviously it's his last match on a big mania as well, WrestleMania 35. You just would have thought that Kurt Angle would have had a bit more of a marquee match rather than sort of a filler moment, which is sort of arguably squashed in a few minutes.
You could have even brought John Cena out in the old Reds like shorts that he wore the day he debuted, just for a killer laugh. And like, even when they brought him back for his Thugonomics match against, I believe it was Elias or whoever. They could have even done that. Do you know what I mean? But it's a missed opportunity, and like I said, it would have been like a circle being complete at that point. Do you know what I mean? It would have been the full circle of the story of John Cena and Kurt Angle, really.
It would have been indeed there. Would have loved to see the slap again as well. Whether it could have even been Angle this time slapping Cena, just knowing he's not going to get the job done before he's hit with an AA, and then that's it, 1, 2, 3. Would have been a perfect way to finish, but I guess that wasn't to be. When it comes to what ifs, sometimes I really have to ask myself a question of the fact that you have something built so well, so perfectly when it first starts in WWE, and then it breaks apart, and you think to yourself, right, we're going to do that match, and it's going to be at a WrestleMania. This match didn't end up taking place at WrestleMania. It actually happened at Battleground 2016, which, yes, it is a B pay-per-view, and it was done at this pay-per-view because it was the last opportunity they could do this match before they did a draft and split everybody up in the roster, which they did split these guys up. I'm talking about, of course, the Shield, the triple threat match, Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins. Now, for me, how this is not done at a WrestleMania as a main event, the fact that these guys came in, they were dominant, they were undefeated as a trio for like ages in WWE before they would lose a match, and they were really good on WrestleManias as well. They were winning matches every time they were on Mania. So the fact that they did the breakup, and the fact that it never led to the triple threat match, for me, just criminal booking. How did it not happen?
Even the fact that the whole story is that all three of them are champion in the same night. I forget the pay-per-view now off the top of my head, but like, these guys all won the same belt in the same night because of a cash-in and stuff. And yeah, this is why, again, I've always been really skeptical of the draft of when it comes throughout the year, because they do it at dumb points, and like before it'd be at Survivor Series time, where the whole idea was brand loyalty. And it's like, how do you expect to do brand loyalty when they've been on that show for a month? And again, same reason here, that they were forced into a position because of poor positioning for something that they only do once a year, and they missed a massive opportunity to do it. I mean, I suppose on one side it's possibility it still might happen, because all three guys are still active. Yes, one of them is in a different company now under a different name. There is a slim chance it could still happen, but the fact that WWE never did it when they had the opportunity first time round is just insane.
Yeah, it's massively insane, to be fair. And the fact that they never did that, and the fact they never did this match either. The fact it's been done in NXT, but it's not been done on the main roster. I'm talking about the four horsewomen: Charlotte Flair, Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Bayley. We've had triple threat matches and variations, of course, but we've not had the fatal four-way on the main roster. And that would have felt like that could have been a WrestleMania main event as well. Obviously, just like a Shield triple threat as well. These four ladies changed the game, it felt, at one point in NXT when it came to women's wrestling. That then transitioned onto the main roster as well, but when we were going through the Divas era, and the fact that we never got the opportunity to have these four, going for the championship, potentially being one of the top matches, if not the top match of a WrestleMania, for me is also criminal. I know injuries played its part in a couple of years. Bayley was missing, of course, 37, I believe 38 as well, but hey, there could have been a time that this match could have happened, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially once Becky becomes the man. Like, for me, it was kind of like, until that point, Becky was kind of always like not almost like underappreciated, because you had Charlotte, who was obviously a Charlotte Flair. The name alone says it all, and how she's booked. The fact that she's a 14-time women's champion. You've got Sasha Banks, who has had Mania matches after Mania matches. Do you know what I mean? She's had she's had such a great career since coming to the roster. Bayley, obviously last one to come up on the roster, but turned that all around and became a massive star, especially when, like, again, how her character is portrayed and she's part of that certain demographic. But then once Becky becomes the man and raises her how much she's worth to the business, the fact that they never do this match is just, again, another criminal option. The fact, again, another one that still might happen at some point in the future, but the fact that you, again, had all four of them at one point, it's shocking how this never happened, especially like when they went through that whole women's evolution thing and like trying to promote more women's wrestling. It, like, obviously they weren't as big as they were now, but even then, putting those four in a match would have been just as good as it would be today, because, do you know what I mean? They know each other so well. You can imagine that the chemistry and what would happen in that match would just be phenomenal.
I 100% agree. I think it would be a show stealer, to say the very least. The only thing that makes a saving grace, like you said there's a potential this still could happen somewhere down the line, because it looks like we've got Mercedes Moné debuting AEW imminently at the time of recording. She may have even debuted by the time this is released to big business. But obviously, she has done an interview recently where she said that she expects to be back in WWE one day. Let's see if the other three ladies are still there at the time when that match can still happen, because that does really feel like unfinished business, if you are asking me. Shall we move on then in the meantime to WrestleMania 23? And obviously, Battle of the Billionaires could have been so much different. It was Bobby Lashley versus Umaga. Of course, there were the representations of Vince McMahon and Donald Trump, and of course the loser got his head shaved. That was Vince McMahon. But this could have been Hulk Hogan versus The Big Show. Would you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so obviously when you give me these ideas for these videos, I then go on this tangent of trying to find Mania matches that never happened, and I stumbled across this one only today as we're recording it. The fact that apparently the idea was originally supposed to be that Donald Trump representative wasn't Bobby Lashley. It was meant to be Hulk Hogan, and the Big Show was going to be Vince McMahon's representative of the match, with obviously Hogan power slamming the Big Show, and Trump gets the win as he does with Lashley. But apparently the rumor has it that Hogan and Vince fell out and didn't speak for over a year, which was why it was canned apparently, and why Big Show unfortunately never got the spot. So yeah, it's a very surprising one, but I just thought it was quite hilarious, the fact that what we could have got would have been not exactly the most exciting match, Hogan versus Big Show. You can probably go back on the network on WCW and find half a dozen of their matches, and like, aren't they the two that did it with the monster trucks on the roof of a building? Do you know what I mean? So there's a whole catalogue of matches there. But I just found the idea that it was meant to be Hulk Hogan and Big Show in this match would have just been insane. It would have been amazing.
Halloween Havoc 1995. It was a sight for sore eyes, to say the very least. Like you say, this match could have been something for WrestleMania. It certainly would have been very different to what we got. Obviously, it was that was being one of the newer stars at the time, but I believe it was actually Hogan's fee that was the issue that led to him and Vince not talking for a full year. And like you say, poor Big Show. He'd been imitating Hulk Hogan a few years earlier. Maybe we could have had the yellow of Hogan actually on both superstars could have actually played into that story storyline. But hey, what will be, will be. What if is a what if on that one, unfortunately. But Hogan will mention again for the next one. And I'll tell you what we've not talked about on this video at all so far is Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I've got two of them really, because WrestleMania 19 is Austin's swan song for 19 years. Obviously, I imagine he probably hand selected The Rock as his opponent, but there was an opportunity to have Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan. We mentioned about these dream matches, the fact that, once in a lifetime, the fact that we had The Rock versus Hogan the year before WrestleMania 18, so I guess that's what rules it out, doing Austin Hogan there. But WrestleMania 19, you could have done that, and it would have been built as one of the biggest matches of all time. Again, who would have won? Because Austin's leaving the next day. It could have been questionable, I suppose, once again. But at the same time, I think as a match, as a marquee, as a pay-per-view buy, I think a lot of people would have been throwing money to see Austin versus Hogan in 2003.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it now, today, it's kind of one of the few what-if matches that I'm actually glad didn't happen. So yeah, so at 19, you're looking at a guy who's on his way out. You're looking at Hogan, he's like probably 20 years on his way out, like past his day. And it would have been the idea of just two different generational talents like coming together and facing each other. And I think, like, from what I looked online and saw, it was kind of like, I think from what I've read, it was that Austin didn't want to do the match purely on the basis of that Hogan still has a bit of leeway with Vince, and it's kind of like, I think Hogan would probably think of it if I do this, I'm going to be expecting to lose to Hogan. And like I said, I think he's probably really smart in not doing the match, just for the fact that he's protected his legacy, because I wouldn't want him to go out on a loss to Hogan. It kind of doesn't make sense for me. Like, again, the whole idea of putting over someone younger, and yet he's losing to Hulk Hogan in his supposedly final WrestleMania match. It doesn't work for me, brother.
No, it doesn't work for me either, to be honest. And there's why I have an alternative out there as well, because someone debuted the following night on Monday Night Raw, and I'm guessing they would have had his contract signed, sealed, delivered by then. Was one Bill Goldberg. Obviously, when you go through the Monday Night Wars, obviously there was one bald guy in black shorts or black trunks that was massively big for WWE, and there was one in WCW. It was Steve Austin and Goldberg. They were two of the big reasons that people watched those shows. Imagine the dream match that could have been Stone Cold versus Goldberg, WrestleMania 19. What a spot that would have been for, say, Goldberg to actually debut. Yeah,
I mean, for me, this is a playground argument, like, that just would go on for years. Like, you'd have your mates that would watch WCW. Me as the WWE fan, it would kind of be a case of, it's almost like a case of my dad can beat your dad up, but it's a case of my bald-headed wrestler can beat your bald-headed wrestler with these two. And it was just always one of them things where it's like, oh man, imagine if Stone Cold Steve Austin and Goldberg ever tore it up in a ring, how good the match would be. Like, especially at this point, you're looking at prime Goldberg in the late 90s in WCW, where he's an absolute unit, and then Austin, who's just this beer drinking, no nonsense taking guy. Just what they could have put on would have been so entertaining. Like, thinking of it now, like how we got Cody's return to WWE against Seth Rollins, they could have even done the same thing, had Stone Cold go up against, do you know what I mean, a mystery opponent, and he's standing and all of a sudden you just hear Goldberg music start playing. It would have been absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it would have been a different level. It's one of those that you sort of, I wish it happened. The closest interaction we got is WrestleMania 20, obviously when Goldberg was leaving, and obviously Austin was the special guest referee, so Goldberg and Lesnar did eat some Stone Cold stunners. So we're seeing Goldberg eat a stunner at least at the WrestleMania, but as a match, it definitely is a what if. And like you say, the only way we can have a proper match these days is WWE 2K, unfortunately. But we move on in the meantime, and someone that was expecting hopefully to get a WrestleMania main event was actually left out of the pack in the end. Mankind obviously was expected at WrestleMania 15 to be included in the Steve Austin Rock match, but as a sort of a bit of a thank you for all the hard work he was doing, obviously Rock and Mankind had a fantastic series of matches, starting at Survivor Series, obviously with the Deadly Game tournament, rolled through to the Royal Rumble with the I Quit match, then did the Empty Arena at halftime heat, of course, during the Super Bowl. So the championship had gone back and forth a few times. Obviously the night where obviously everyone changed the channel as well for Mankind, when WCW, Eric Bischoff, Tony Schiavone actually made known of the results. Everyone went, well, screw Nitro, I want to see Mankind win the title over The Rock. It felt like it was a big thank you coming Mankind's way, but instead in the end it actually settled for being the special guest referee.
Yeah, I mean, from what you take with this one, it's a lot of backstage politics is the reason why Mankind was never put in this match. I mean, like that I Quit match, I can remember so much of it for how crazy it was. Like Mick falling off the side, landing on the lighting rig, and then the lights go out as part of the production. And just like then the story of like it was a pre-recorded I Quit like that they played, and just an absolute madness. And yeah, to think that he was supposed to be part of this, but then we don't get Rock Triple H at 15. This is where you kind of, do you know what I mean? You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So again, another one that you might partially be thankful that it didn't happen, but then imagine what could have happened if they did put Mick Foley in it, because Mick's a great wrestler, and him and Austin, like I imagine, can put on some absolutely killer matches together. So you throw Rock in the mix, and even just the promos alone would have just been phenomenal in the build to this match.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the fact that Mick was doing some amazing work with The Rock, and obviously Austin at that point, you could start building at the Deadly Game tournament, which we've covered on this channel as well already, where Austin, he was screwed, and that's when The Rock joins the corporation, and then it starts with Austin and Rock slowly teasing for them to get to WrestleMania. You knew at that point that match was going to happen at some point, but of course Austin has to get through Vince through the Royal Rumble and St. Valentine's Day Massacre beforehand. So it's one of those that as a storyline narrative, it could have all come together, it could have all been poetry, but of course it was Austin Rock, and it was the first of, well, three times a hat trick of WrestleManias. So would have been a special time if Mick could have been involved in this, but he did get a triple threat match for the championship at SummerSlam later that year. Of course, that was Austin and Triple H involved with that, and Mankind actually picked up the victory and was champion for all of 24 hours. We're going to roll it back to old school, former tag team partners, because WrestleMania 9, I think, could have had one of those matches going against one another. We had Shawn Michaels versus Tatanka, two of my favourite wrestlers around WrestleMania 9 time, actually, but the match was a bit of a questionable one, because although it was a decent encounter for that show, it ended with a count out because, well, Tatanka was on an undefeated streak at the time. They didn't want him to lose that. Shawn Michaels was the IC champion. They didn't want him dropping the title, but he did drop the championship a short time after WrestleMania to a returning Marty Janetty, of course, who was the tag team partner of Shawn Michaels back in the late 80s, early 90s, up until the infamous Barbershop, where Shawn Michaels broke up the tag team with the sweet chin music, and of course then putting Marty Janetty through the Barbershop window as well. Marty was out for a long time, but when he did come back, he won the Intercontinental title from Shawn Michaels on Monday Night Raw, and they had a program that went on after that. But for me, I look at it and say that felt like it could have been a WrestleMania match. The fact that the Rockers broke up and all that sort of stuff just would have made more sense for me to have that rather than Shawn versus Tatanka, because, as I say, it felt like they were booked into a corner doing that match, and by doing a screwy finish, but that people were probably left unhappy and unsatisfied, especially as that was the opener of that WrestleMania as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a time earlier than that where the dynamic of tag team partners, like you obviously had the Mega Powers with Hogan and Macho Man, but they weren't naturally a tag team when they came in, whereas with the Rockers, they were a tag team when they showed up on WWE, and then they've been a tag team for the whole time. So to have that story play out where you have a natural tag team that have been there all the time, then do a story, go one-on-one with each other, it's almost, again, it's like a curse of the time period where they were afraid to do it because they didn't know maybe how it was going to be reacted to by the crowd and stuff like that. I mean, everyone knows what happens with Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels going on in the future, but I really think for a storyline purpose this was a missed opportunity, because Shawn Michaels is obviously that guy. He's Mr. WrestleMania, and he's had all these moments, and I just think this would have been another thing to cement Michaels as obviously Mr. WrestleMania, where he'd been involved in a proper storyline where you'd have had a tag team split and have a match against each other to show who was the better person in that tag team.
Yeah, for me, I think it would have been awesome to see it go down. Either however they would have booked the finish would have been interesting. Like you say, you could build Shawn up. We could have had Marty win the title earlier at that point. Shawn does eventually win the title back from Marty anyway in 1993. So, I mean, it's a case of it would have been a fun match to have seen happen. And again, it's that big what if, because we've seen tag team partners face one another before, but this one I think just felt really personal. Like we said, the barbershop incident, how they broke up, always felt so special. And it felt at one point that was going to be the match even for WrestleMania 8 before Marty was not able to be taking part in that. So in the end, it was Shawn Michaels versus Tito Santana, which was the opening match of that WrestleMania. So it's a shame that they never materialized, but obviously they did have their program in the end. Obviously, we mentioned tag team partners, obviously breaking up with Shawn Michaels and Marty Janetty. We don't actually mention many tag team matches. So how about LOD, the Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors against Demolition, a match that probably should have happened at WrestleMania 7, because if you go back in the old days, back into the 80s, we had LOD, the Road Warriors, that were tearing up in NWA. There was something different for the mid-80s, and obviously WWE would have loved to have had their hands on the Road Warriors at that point. Couldn't do so they had to create their own. Obviously, they had the Powers of Pain in there as well. But Demolition was the one they settled with, and that was the one that got over, and that was at one point the longest reigning tag team champions of all time. We got to a point when, like 1990, both teams were under one roof. LOD came in as babyfaces, Demolition were heels at the time. Of course, Axe was kind of fading into the background, so it was more Smash and Crush going forward, and Crush was the newest member. But they kind of did this Survivor Series match where both were on opposite teams, and they both all got eliminated at the same time, double count out, DQ. The actual finish escapes me at the time of recording, but the fact is, this could have built to a big time match, a dream match, if you will. The Road Warriors of the 80s that were so dominant. Obviously, when you look at the Demolition that was so dominant as well, WrestleMania 7 would have been a perfect placement for this. However, both teams were on this show, but against different tag teams. And the fact is, well, Demolition lost on this show, where the Road Warriors LOD actually won on this show. It just feels like it's a missed opportunity to me that you could have done this tag team match that I think would have had more headlines than what they ended up actually going on to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is that normal case with pro wrestling, that it's someone has this one thing, we can't have it, so we're going to make our own. And it just so happens at one point in the timeline that they both happen to be at the same place at the same time, but they never pull the trigger on it. And it's kind of like just a really big missed opportunity, like four big guys, face paint, leather, shoulder pads. You know what I mean? It kind of writes itself in a weird 1990s storyline kind of way that wrestling was back then. And yeah, just a shame another one that we never really got. In what, like, at that time was a golden generation of tag teams as well, because you think the other teams that are in or around that the company at that time, Nasty Boys, Bushwhackers, do you know what I mean? There is a great catalogue of tag teams there, but to put these two together and never doing it on WrestleMania, I think it's just criminal.
Yeah, I have to agree, criminal as well. The fact is, they could have really sold this to be a massive deal, and the fact they didn't, just for me, just seems a bit of a crazy decision. And let's move things forward, in fact quite forward, to the WrestleMania where, well, pretty much everything had to be changed in the end because of CM Punk A, leaving the company, walking out, and B, a yes movement. WrestleMania 30, pretty much a whole calamity of what that show could have been. There were 4 matches that could have been. We'll go through some of them now. Obviously, Triple H versus Randy Orton versus Batista. There was at one point Randy Orton versus Batista as well. Obviously, the Evolution triple threat match, which, to be honest, really, I'm kind of glad that didn't materialize.
Yeah, I think, I just, at the time, absolutely should, like, the Mania we got was better than probably anything else that we was going to get. That's a storyline that I just feel it's hard to tell, because obviously with Batista, he'd obviously been out of the business for a couple of years doing movies and stuff, and he obviously wasn't favoured coming back in the Rumble. And then you had Triple H, who was kind of like on his way out because he's this authority figure, and you've got Randy, who's like the golden child of WWE, and it was like, yeah, it probably would have been good to have seen it, but not this year. Definitely, like I say, I'm glad we got Daniel Bryan and the Yes Movement instead.
Completely agreed. I think there was a different time period this match would have worked better, and I think you're probably looking at like the end of the 2010s. I think would have been the right time. I think 2014 people just had soured on this a little bit. I think obviously the predictable Batista coming back, winning the Rumble, Daniel Bryan wasn't even in it, so people just booed Batista. He was Blue Tista as well at one point as well. It just felt like 3 heels involved in the match here, and I think people just didn't want it. But there was a period as well where CM Punk was going to be going against Triple H. That was something that was expected as well, and obviously that didn't materialize. And and CM Punk walking out of the company. CM Punk was going to get the victory as well, but of course, different things and different reasons of why Punk left the company. But he is back today.
Yeah. Again, time period one, it would have been a case of like you'd almost would have expected that to have been Punk's main event that he never got. But I think obviously if you go back to the podcast he done with Colt Cabana, it was a case of that Punk didn't want to do the match. He has no reason to want to fight Triple H, and you can kind of understand why. And it's one of them ones where it'd have been like it would have been nice to have seen it, but I think for me personally, it's lacking. It's not even lacking story. I just kind of like I just want to see Punk do bigger and better things, really.
Absolutely. Of course, we were meant to get Daniel Bryan versus Sheamus. Obviously, Daniel Bryan ended up being put in matches that we wanted to see since. And we'd seen Sheamus versus Daniel Bryan at 2 previous WrestleMania, so there's no what-if factor in that one. No need to discuss it. But The Rock versus Brock Lesnar is one that certainly was rumoured for WrestleMania 30. But of course, Rock had picked up an injury, hadn't he, at WrestleMania 29, which I think ruled him out of being competing in WrestleManias going on every year at that time.
Yeah, so obviously facing Cena the year before, I think he pulled his groin as well, and apparently the rumor is that scared him off coming back because obviously with his Hollywood regime at the minute, getting himself physically ready for a match on the hopefulness that he doesn't get injured like he did the previous year. I think it was just a case of playing it safe and not doing it. But so seeing Rock and Brock, go at WrestleMania, hey, would have been as entertaining as anything. But I just like I said, for me, like I say, I think WrestleMania 30 worked out the best for everyone and how it actually happened from what we could have got.
The miracle on Bourbon Street was just amazing, and what a great finish to a fantastic WrestleMania in the end. The fact that it was kind of thrown together, it felt, as they went along at the last minute, but still it turned out to actually have the best results of what they had planned going into it from months previous. Obviously, we mentioned about the Big Show earlier in this video. Obviously, we mentioned the idea about celebrities being involved in WrestleMania earlier in this video. Big Show versus Shaquille O'Neal is one that's been teased for a number of WrestleManias. Obviously never quite materialized. I know the Big Show was quite disappointed about that as well. And it's a major as a what if, but I mean, you know, outside attraction does get involved when they see celebrities involved, and we've seen it obviously in the modern days with the likes of Logan Paul or Bad Bunny. We've seen other people like Floyd Mayweather get involved as well, and obviously at the first ever WrestleMania, even though as a special guest referee, Muhammad Ali, of course, now has just been, and he's going to be inducted to the Hall of Fame this year, so congratulations there. Obviously to see that as an attraction match here, Big Show versus Shaq, could have been something. Not sure it's something I wanted to see, but certainly has its what if factor anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you take the reports into account and that Shaq had got himself into a really good like condition to actually do this match as well, for me, this is up there with Sting and Taker as kind of like one of these matches that was teased for so long and just never happened. I don't expect like Taker Sting quality up here. Big Show Shaq maybe down here somewhere. Like there's just a complete opposite scale of quality that we would have got. But yeah, just I said from what we get now with all these celebrity matches and Logan Paul and Johnny Knoxville and hey, even Drew Carey being in the Rumble and all these random people that we get come in, it just would have been a WrestleMania moment. Do you know what I mean? It's what we expect every year now with these spots. And yeah, just another one that for some reason never just happened to come to fruition. And yeah, it's just one of the things. And again, poor Big Show being screwed out of another WrestleMania moment.
He's had a few screwed up ones over the years, hasn't he, poor Big Show? Well, I'll tell you what, let's talk about a potential that could have happened, which is Mr. Kennedy is someone we want to talk about because he won Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 23. His storyline was that he was going to cash it in at WrestleMania 24. Now, of course, he picked up an injury at the time, which they expected it to be a lot worse than what it was. So they did a switch of the Money in the Bank briefcase. They gave it to Edge, and Edge cashed it in on the same week on The Undertaker on SmackDown, which of course was a big shock and a big hoo-ha at the time. Little did they know that Mr. Kennedy would return a couple of months later, and obviously the push that was expected from Mr. Kennedy just never happened. So I suppose what if, not necessarily opponent, but WrestleMania 24, perhaps he could have cashed in on Undertaker and Edge. Who knows? That was the main event of that show for the championship. But you just feel what if with Mr. Kennedy, really? He could have been a much bigger deal than what he was.
Yeah, I mean, for me, he's kind of like what LA Knight is now. Like, he's a guy who has a gimmick and his entrance is his thing and it's over with the crowd. And, like, he had the possibility to naturally get himself to the top of the card. And obviously, he won Money in the Bank. He then obviously, like I says, I think he's misdiagnosed, and they tell him he's going to be out for a year. He comes back 2 months later, and the career that he could have had from that point, like if he'd have gone to Mania, won the world title, and he could have gone on to just had a completely different landscape for him instead. Like, obviously, I think he ends up back in Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 24, and then he's released from there, and then he goes on to TNA and has a run with those guys. And it's like, yeah, it's just okay. This one is kind of just like a what if of a career, and it's a shame because I really liked Mr. Kennedy. Do you know what I mean? Back then, he was just one of them guys that kind of like how LA Knight now does. Do you know what I mean? He's over for the natural fact of just being entertaining. So it's a shame.
He really is a shame. He was one of my favourite wrestlers at the time, and I really felt there was something there, and felt like storylines were being put in place. He was beating former world champions. It just felt like something was going to be there for Kennedy. But when he returned in 2007, he just seemed to drop to the mid card and just, step after step. It just felt like, they dropped the ball on Kennedy, and it was, one of those big what ifs, unfortunately, not just in WrestleMania matches, but what could have been, because if he'd have cashed in and won at WrestleMania 24, he could have been the first person to do so. Everyone talks about Seth Rollins, the heist of the century. Maybe it could have been Kennedy. We'll never know.
Yeah.
Last but not least, NXSteve, you have a funny story about potentially who could have ended the Undertaker streak before Brock Lesnar.
Oh no, this is why I enjoy doing these videos. So this one match, I just thought was the most daft thing in the world. And the idea is that Ted DiBiase Jr. was going to be the guy to break the Undertaker streak, on the sheer basis that his father, Ted DiBiase Sr., was the guy that brought Undertaker into the business. Dude, would have been the weirdest booking you'd ever seen in your life, having Ted DiBiase Jr. do it. It's kind of another one that I'm very glad that didn't happen, obviously with what's happened in more recent times. But hey, like I said, just a very strange one. The fact that we could have had Ted DiBiase Jr. breaking the streak instead of Brock Lesnar. How they would have booked it, to me, that would be along the lines of almost like Shane McMahon breaking the streak. It's a very weird booking that I'm glad just never happened.
I'm so pleased it never happened. I mean, to think just how his career went anyway. Obviously, like you say, with real life afterwards, but it just feels like it would have been totally the wrong decision to do. In fact, if anyone out there does actually make some noise now, let us know. Did you want Ted DiBiase to do it? Yeah, I don't think there's anyone out there. I will take that as a no as well. Yeah, it just seems like it would have been a daft decision. Brock obviously was the right decision. I think at the time I thought it was the wrong decision, but the fact is it did take Brock to another level at the time. And in fact, he went on to destroy Cena and was obviously seen as one of the final bosses for such a long time afterwards. In hindsight now, I look and say, perhaps it was that right decision at the time at WrestleMania 30, even though I probably was against it for years.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I was exactly the same, and we all look back at it differently now, and kind of we're all a bit smarter and a bit more clued up than we were obviously a few years ago, and it all makes sense in the end. But yeah, the Ted DiBiase one is just one I'm glad that never happened. And like I said, I find it more credible that Brock Lesnar was the one to break the streak than Ted DiBiase Jr.
Think so as well, absolutely. Well, I've got to say, there's a big host of matches we've talked about of what ifs there, but now I think the biggest what if is, what if we missed something? What if we missed a match that you're actually screaming at the screen saying, we didn't talk about it? Let us know in the comments below right now what matches, what ifs, what matches that never happened at WrestleMania it should have. Let us know in the comments below right now. We'd like to know your opinions of what matches you would think was a missed opportunity back in WrestleMania's past. NXSteve, I want to say a big thank you for being on this podcast. It's been great to have you on board as always and to discuss professional wrestling.
Dude, it's always a pleasure being on it, man. Like I said, to have a different subject to talk about in the case of what ifs, it's do you know what I mean? It's always fun to, like I said, go out there and find what's out there in the world, what should have been, what should have happened. It's the same as watching a film and reading how the script was changed for this purpose. It's exactly along the same lines, and it's highly entertaining just to see what could have been.
Absolutely, indeed. Yeah, what could have been indeed. And obviously, if there are matches that we discussed in this video that you think, oh, I'd have liked to have seen that, let us know what would be your most popular choices if you could change things. What match of all them would you say that would have been a match I would have liked to have seen? But that's all from us anyway. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like button, share with a friend, and subscribe as well. And there'll be more unique content coming coming to this channel as well between now and WrestleMania. Like to spice things up for WrestleMania seasons, so make sure to keep glued to this channel. More videos will be on the way. Make sure to check out the videos that have been coming out this week already. But that's all from us. Thank you for watching. Look after yourselves and each other, and we'll see you again very soon here on SCW. Take care. Thank you for watching. And if you want to see more in the meantime, check out these videos on the side of your screen right now.